Supports in the early game are supposed to be the most impactful heroes in the game, making space and shutting down opponents where it's needed. One major mistake that I've seen across all brackets, however, is that supports don't rotate nearly enough in the early game, and when they do, it's just not impactful. Today, we're here with a guide on how to do rotations for both support positions. Before we begin, here's a question to think about. Which support hero deserves a buff the most in the upcoming patch? I think Dazzle's due for a bit of a buff. What do you guys think? To get our questions about rotations answered, of course, we're gonna have to look at the top of the ladder for our answers. The first game on display today is Lina Position 4 game, played by Taiga. His lane is Lina and Axe versus PA and Lich. They're expected to do really well in this lane, and shutting down PA is always a priority, so his goal will be to stay on top as long as he can to put the pressure on the carry. At around minute 3 he dies, and this is where the first real choice is in the game for him. He opts to TP back to the top even though the Axe is completely fine on his own, since a stacked wave is pushing into his tower as a result of an earlier fight. He could choose to TP mid to secure a rune for his Kunkka, but he opts to stay top to keep putting on the pressure. Similarly, he's aggressively fighting the PA at the bounty rune timing instead of going to the rune, since he doesn't want the PA to get away with farming that hard camp that they managed to pull earlier. The key here is his focus on relentlessly shutting the PA down, so he's going to keep playing top no matter what until minute 11 when they take the tower. Immediately then he smokes to the mid lane with the Axe to fight for the middle tower. Our first example was a typical game for a lane dominator position 4 that just wants to shut the carry down. You'll rarely want to rotate in these games because any breathing room that you give to the safe laners is really costly. Let's move on to another position 4 game that's quite different. In the second example, we see Taiga again, but as Earth Spirit this time. He has a Viper on his side against Magnus and Anti-Mage, a quite easy lane to play, all things considered, and shutting down Anti-Mage is really important here. He isn't playing a lane-dominating hero, however, so we can expect his focus to shift to the mid lane quite a bit. At around minute 3 is the time to start thinking about the 4-minute runes. He makes an aggressive move against Magnus, since leaving his Viper 1v2 against 2 healthy heroes is not exactly ideal, but unfortunately his Viper tunnel visions on the kill and forces the fight to continue. This results in him losing all of his health and mana, so he can't go to secure runes against Ember. Just to see how big of an impact securing the rune has, especially in close matchups like Ember versus Void Spirit, let's look over to the mid lane. Void is up half a level, but is crucially low on regen. This results in him having to play defensive even when he hits level 6 first against the Ember who had the rune secured for him. He could easily dominate this lane, maybe even kill the Ember, but he simply doesn't have enough mana and HP to do so. So missing that 4-minute rune effectively gave Ember almost 2 minutes of free farm in a lane he was losing, and the only reason Ember's advantage stopped accumulating is because Taiga secured the 5-minute bounty. Once he does so, he goes back to the top lane to pull the hard camp, but goes back to mid again to secure the 6-minute rune. It clearly shows his approach to the game in an extremely similar situation is almost the polar opposite because not only did AM leave top lane already, both Viper and him are extremely bad at taking towers. This means that if he stays top long term, he actually puts less pressure on the AM farming his jungle than if he roamed around. Once his Void Spirit had enough resources, they make a smoke move into the enemy triangle searching for the Anti-Mage. They end up finding him, which results in a fight. They trade a few kills while his offlane Viper is now able to take the top tower, since even a Viper can push and hit buildings in an empty lane. After the gank, he sees the Viper die to a top gank, so he makes a decision to secure the 10-minute runes on the bot lane. Mars is not reading the map too well, so he ends up dying to this rotation too. Overall, this approach to the position 4 is a lot more about making moves around certain timings. The most common timings to pay attention to are the power runes, bounty runes, catapults, and when your mid laner hits a big power spike. Most commonly, they're level 6. Almost all of his moves are tied to securing these small objectives and killing people on the way, not just randomly making moves on the map. Playing position 5 is similar to position 4, in a way. You'll have games where you need to stay in a lane and just play it without rotating, but you'll also have games where many rotations around timings are just as important. However, the 5 usually wants to rotate for different reasons than the 4, since you're leaving your carry behind if you move from your lane. Our first game for position 5 is a Magnus game by No-Tail. He's supporting a Terrorblade against a DK and a Rubik. They can't really kill him, and TB just wants to enjoy life in the jungle from quite early on, so his job will be survival until that point. Since we know that, we can say with almost 100% certainty that before TB leaves this lane, he's not going to rotate at all. It'll be interesting to see what he does once TB does leave, but nothing interesting will happen until then. Indeed, around 6 minutes and 40 seconds, the Terrorblade leaves the lane. No-Tail at this point is level 3 with an empty lane presented to him, so he'll just make the obvious choice of taking it. Not only does this keep the tower alive against DK, it also gives him much-needed levels to max out in power. He stays there until a rotation by his offlaner to kill the DK at around minute 9, at which point he just goes to the mid lane. If we look at Dire's draft, they're all about taking towers early with Chen to take farm away from Terrorblade. So as the Magnus, or any support for that matter, your first and foremost job in the game would be to defend those towers to give TB space. Once he's sure that the mid tower isn't falling, he makes a TP rotation to kill DK pushing his top tower, making this effectively the first time he really rotates to take a fight at minute 11, yet his movements had a lot of impact on this game. A lineup with DK and Chen couldn't take a tower in 11 minutes. He has all the levels in the world without buying the tome, and his TB has been free farming the entire time. So just don't forcibly rotate when you don't need to. As our last game for today, let's look at a game where the 5 had to rotate, and quite a bit too. This is Celery playing Snapfire in a lane that's quite hard, to say the least. Supporting PA against Rubik and Pangolier, they're quite far behind by minute 5 or so, which will only get worse as Pango gets his ultimate. Unlike TB, PA is not a hero that can jungle effectively from super early, so instead of him leaving the lane, Celery will have to leave instead. If he can't really make the PA farm the bottom lane, he might as well be somewhere else to draw attention away. So he makes a move to the mid, which doesn't kill the enemy Tiny, but it does make the Rubik TP there. That lets the PA get a lot of farm on the bottom lane and opens up the Pangolier to die to the Ember Spirit gank not a minute later. He, of course, takes part in said gank. Immediately after, he leaves PA to farm the bottom lane solo and goes mid with Ember to secure the bottom rune. Another fight ensues, which again gives PA space to farm undisturbed. As he respawns, he makes a smoke move with his position 4 to the top lane for the 10-minute bounties and an attempt at ganking the enemy carry. They manage to kill the Void, force another fight at the top lane, which they end up winning, netting them the top tower. He's extremely proactive, unlike No-Tail was in the first game. The main reason for the difference is twofold. Number 1, he will more than likely die against Pangolier 1v1, so he can't hold the tower either way. And number 2, PA couldn't jungle that early. This left him with only one option to draw attention away from PA, rather than just holding the tower to give her space. In these 4 examples, we saw 4 radically different ways to approach rotations in the early game, and all 4 of them were correct for the situation. So how can you decide what to do in your games? First off, be aware of your options. These 4 matches demonstrated almost every option pretty well. The only thing missing is making stacks. To give a short list, here are 5 options. Rotating around timings to secure objectives. Rotating to force fights, which will draw attention to that lane. Staying in your lane to shut a hero down. Taking a free lane for yourself. And of course, making stacks. How you decide what to do at the appropriate moment is dependent on a lot of things, but here are a few really important pointers to keep in mind. What do you want out of your lane? What is your hero good at? Which other lanes want you to rotate to them? Try to ask yourself these questions at the start of the game and then make a rough plan for the first 10 minutes. For example, if you play a hero like Tiny or Clockwork on position 4, there's a good chance that you'll need to secure the 4-minute rune. And this is something you should plan as soon as the game starts, but latest a minute before. If you have a hard time keeping a check on the time, you can set a stopwatch or an alarm to remind yourself. That's what I used to do for myself when I was learning this. That's it for today, guys. I hope you'll find this very useful. There's a lot more about support rotations than what we put into the video today, but I hope this will give a good foundation for you guys to think a lot more about your early game. This is how you can and will carry your games as a support, so make sure you get down your first 10 to 15 minutes to an absolute science.